Brian voted. Brian.
And I voted on it.
Okay, we are going to reconvene our meeting and welcome our legislative counsel, Michael Brady, to join us to help us answer some questions we have on S-100 and water and wastewater. Let me get started. Thanks.
Should I just jump right in?
Yes.
So the chair sent me a couple of questions and I don't know if you want me to share or not, or just work off of what you have on your committee website.
What are you looking at?
Well, I'm looking at draft number 2.1 S-100.
Yeah.
So it's section 25 of that draft.
Very end.
Excuse me?
At the very end.
Yeah. I was asked to look at this and I have a bunch of questions. It relates to the permitting of water supply connections and sanitary sewer line connections to existing structures or new or existing structures. And there's a permit requirement in statute that says you need a potable water supply or on-site wastewater permit, making a new or modified connection to a new or existing potable water supply or wastewater system. And there's been concern or really kind of a dialogue, I guess, among the municipalities who don't think that that permit from A&R is necessary. Because they think that they can do it themselves. And over time, over the past few years, there's been authority either proposed or actually included in statute that would allow a municipality to approve such connections on their own if certain criteria were met. But this language, I'm not really sure what it's proposing to do, because it says it's going to review and update its policies and processes governing the issue of water and wastewater connection permits. Well, the requirement is in statute and rule. It's not in policies and processes. So is there a proposal to amend the statute or rule? I don't know. And then for the issuance of water and wastewater connection permits, are those going to still be issued by A&R? Or are they going to be, I think that's what this language says. And then to eliminate and identify redundancy between state and local permits and reduce administrative burden and cost for municipalities and applicants. Again, I don't really know how they're contemplating how to do that. And that raises then a question of what's the public process around this? It doesn't seem to be rulemaking or legislative action. So is there a public process, or is A&R just doing this on their own? And do you want a legislative process? I mean, you're the ultimate policymaker. You're the one that gave A&R the statutory requirement to permit. You're the one that can change that authority if you want. So I don't know what you want for your involvement in any change to how the water and wastewater connection permits are going to be issued. It's a question for you all. But then I look at what the agency shall do on page 44. They shall update the process to obtain water and wastewater connection permits to be simplified and expedited. Again, it's a permit, it's not a process. And I mean, maybe it's the permit process that's going to be simplified and expedited. Maybe it's how that notice from the municipality to A&R that they're going to have a connection, and then review and analyze the standards in other jurisdictions. That's fine. Identify data and document sharing and management solutions associated with permits. I think that's fine. And then establish clear criteria, which to me is a permit standard, including public interest, public health and safety, environmental impacts for the issuance of those permits. For the criteria, there's not a ton of criteria in the A&R rules for connections, but there are criteria. So is it going to be rulemaking, or is it maybe legislative? And then do they report back to you or report to anyone with this information? It doesn't seem to have a report requirement. Doesn't seem to touch you at all, frankly. And so I just have those questions.
Thank you for all those questions.
Oh,
I will start with this topic. And Brian Redmond is here, hopefully to help answer some of those questions. Do members have questions for legislative counsel? After that. Representative Stebbins.
I'm just hoping that after we hear from Brian, maybe our legislative council would have some suggestions as to what to do or not do.
Highly likely. We'll give welcome Mr. Redmond back. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. For the record, Brian Redmond. I'm the Director for the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. I do not have anything formal prepared today, but happy to answer questions, and there appear to be a few. So the language that was submitted to the committee was developed in concert with our sister agency, Commerce and Community Development. And really what the language is attempting to do is to direct the agency to take a look at the process for municipal water and sewer connections. I think that process would involve the engagement of the stakeholders. And during my testimony earlier in the week, identified that being the agency, the consulting community, the contracting community, the development community, and the municipal water and sewer public works officials themselves. So when we were putting together the language, we were evaluating what we had under our existing authorities, and we needed the time frame is slightly elongated given a number of the priorities that the agency has going right now with the bipartisan infrastructure and the ARPA funds. A lot of that work is being administered out of my division right now. I think what we are planning on doing is engaging the stakeholders. I think during this process, this session, and going back many years now, there's been a lot of discussion on water and sewer connections. I have heard from municipalities with a lot of good ideas. And I think that we need to engage the people that are involved with the process to really make sure that what the process that is designed and implemented for the state will achieve our goals of making the permitting process for these types of water and sewer infrastructure expeditious, protective of public health, protective of the environment, and to make sure that the infrastructure stands the test of time, because these are large investments. So we currently in the agency have what's referred to as delegated authority, where we have a process in place to allow municipalities to take full delegation of the rules. So that's all aspects of the wastewater system and potable water supply rules. So we're in 10 BSA chapter 64 right now, as well as partial delegation, which allows municipalities to come to the agency with a delegation agreement to issue connection permits. Currently, we have two municipalities that have received full delegation under the rules. So we have the town of Colchester and the town of Charlotte. Colchester is in the process of returning the program back to the agency because the cost of administering the program was not being covered by their expenses. Additionally, their fees were slightly higher than the state's fees. So I think that they're just part of their decision-making process is that it's costing our residents more to get permits from us than they could otherwise get from the state. The town of Charlotte, we're actively in engaged discussions about them turning the program back to us. In the process of Colchester, we identified some issues with the existing data standards of a community assuming responsibility for the rules and then turning all of that information back over to the agency after they no longer want to administer the program. So part of the charge is to also look at the data aspects of this if we're going to go down the road to make sure that this is properly managed We put all of our permits up on our website, publicly available, electronically available. And I think that's really important for the real estate community, the title attorney community, the public water and wastewater utilities themselves that consult our information. So we feel it's important to take a step back and look at sort of how can we reduce duplicative effort? How can we streamline the process? How can we maintain our outcomes that are in our mission? And how can we manage the data and make it publicly available? So that's where we're thinking. I don't want to presuppose an outcome. I do think there are things that we can do within our own permitting process for if we retain permitting authority to simplify and make the permit process better and more efficient. I also think that a logical outcome would be to reevaluate our partial delegation in that framework and reevaluate what electronic and tech tools we have available for the data management issue, as well as engage with the municipalities and the developers to work through that process to make sure they're interested in partial delegation and would be willing to assume partial delegation. So that's what we were trying to achieve. There's no specific rulemaking in there because we believe we can do it under what we have. Now, with a 2-year time frame, there's possibility that we would come back to the General Assembly if we uncover an issue that we feel actually needs rulemaking. But for the initial push here, we thought that engagement would allow us to evaluate the process, collect the feedback, consult with stakeholders, and see where we land. So that's sort of the background of the language that was provided.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Can you just speak to the redundancies and from where you sit, why does this keep coming up? We spend an inordinate amount of time discussing this in this committee. Whatever the name of our committee is, this topic comes back.
I think in some instances, there are redundancies. I think there are certain towns in Vermont that have extremely high public works standards. And if you were to ask them what value the agency is offering in their permitting process when they have an equally as robust permitting process on the local level, that's redundant. And that does exist. That by no means is statewide. The other piece in my consultation with municipalities is that, and I was talking to what I consider top tier public works officials in the state, people that I use to consult about our programs and their effectiveness, is that many of them really couldn't assume this right now, or they weren't interested in what was proposed. So I think bringing them to the table to make sure they are interested in this works at the municipal level, so municipalities will be willing to assume this responsibility, I think would be valuable. And as I said, they do have some good suggestions just in my initial consultation.
Okay. Does that answer your questions, Michael?
It does. I mean, it's, I think, I'm trying to phrase this. I think Brian's division is one of those divisions that I don't doubt that much. And so hearing Brian's testimony, I have some surety that what they're going to do and how they're going to do it.
I'm wondering if the language could be kind of tightened up a bit to reflect more of what you just said. And I think you might have sent it to me in an email somewhere that sort of, or maybe it was in your testimony the other day, but just the stakeholder process and how you anticipate it unfolding would be helpful. Because questions around public process and not necessarily a fully public process, but it's a stakeholder process. It would be helpful to clarify in here. Is that something you guys can work on together? That'd be awesome.
Sure.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Sakowitz.
Yeah, perhaps I missed something, but I understand why going through this process and this kind of review would be useful. And I don't understand why it needs to be in statute.
I think we've been talking about this for several legislative sessions in a row, and I think it's a good question. I would defer to Mike on probably on answering that question, but I think by putting this language in the bill, this is going to be a directive for the agency to engage with its stakeholders and make recommendations on how to improve the current process. I think it's a nudge.
But this comes from you, right? Like you're saying that you want to do this, so can't you just go ahead and?
Well, it's in response
Do it.
to a request to fully delegate without any process or review. And we've looked into this before, and Mr. Redmond has touched on some of the things that will get lost if the state tracks and has an online database, and in the instance of the 2 delegated towns is actually less expensive. So let's beg the question of, it does keep coming up, but the public currently has access to this data, and that's an important part of the program. And the state is the one that generates that database. So if the towns take it over, I don't know, they would either have to you'll figure it out, I guess, is what you're saying, the process.
Yeah, we have some new technology that we've really invested in at ANR, known as ANR Online. So that allows us to collect information and get it into our data management. It's a way to basically get information from the outside, bring it across the firewall and input it into our data systems, which then go public for display. So I'm hopeful that tool is something that we could probably capitalize on, as well as maybe looking at all out data management solutions. I think those are the things that we need to work with the stakeholders on to make sure that the process is good.
So what you're saying is the ultimate sort of impetus for this bill is coming from outside the agency, but responding to that, you're saying, well, if people want us to do this, then we should set it up in this formal way so that we can make sure that we make it a priority and get it done.
I think that's
out of time.
I think that's accurate. Yes, I think there is room to improve here, and I think we're willing partners to improve the process because it's a priority.
Any other questions? Representative Tory.
Just a comment. I heard Michael say that there is no information about how the recommendations or reporting would come back to us. Is that something that there's something you might want to add in there in terms of accountability and making sure you actually you have a date in here, but I'm wondering if we would want to insert some sort of report.
That's clearly this committee's decision. We are extremely busy with everything that we have going on with the amount of federal funding and state funding pouring in for water and sewer infrastructure, a number of other new programs related to PFAS and lead. If that becomes a sticking point, I think we could come with a status report if needed. But I will say this has been 3 sessions and maybe 4 even that we've been debating this topic. And I think it's time that we need to move it forward and see what the best outcome we can come up with is.
That would be great. I think a status report it doesn't need to be a big new work item, but just more, what have you done to meet this? Yeah. Michael.
I would just say that many of the recent reports I've seen from the agency are like 1 page or 2 page, and then they link to existing public documents that are already on the agency's website. And I like the PCF report was that, and it's just, I've never prepared one, but it doesn't seem like a significant amount of work, but that's the kind of thing that you would be satisfied with. You might just express that.
Okay, great. I'd like to express that.
I think we don't need to make it overly, I don't want to get overly prescriptive. We have the date because you'll be back. Keep it relatively simple, although tightened up. So this is good, because I agree. This one comes around.
So thank you for joining us. We have a few other questions I sent to our legislative council that you may be also helpful for. So if you could stick around, very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tag team in and out, I think. So the second question that I was presented with was the isolation areas. And you received testimony from Thomas Weiss that the fact that isolation areas might extend onto the property of other property will somehow frustrate the purpose and intent of some of what you were doing. And I don't know if it will really change anything from what is the existing kind of dynamic now. You will see on your website that there's this great document that A&R has about, well, let's back up. Under statute and under rule, there's something called presumptive isolation zones that are around wastewater systems and potable water supplies, quote unquote, well. And the isolation distances in Vermont are health-based, as opposed to based on a formula, as opposed to other states where it's just a specified number of feet. And so you go to the A&R rule, there's a table, has basically kind of a formula depending on your system, where you're located, bedrock, or et cetera. And then you calculate your isolation distance. And then you take into account some other things like whether you're near a fuel pump or et cetera. And then you develop your isolation. The professional engineer, a licensed designer that is permitting your system, develops your isolation zone. If that isolation zone extends onto the property of your neighbor, you are required under statute to give them a notice of the fact that it extends, called overshadows, onto your neighbor's property. And the agency has developed a form to provide notification of overshadowing. But they also have kind of a handy, quick summary of what presumption isolation zones are and why they're and what they are and when they're needed and when they're not needed. And I won't read that to you, but you'll kind of get a quick little graphic that shows what an isolation zone can look like around a system and how it can extend on other property. That's the existing standard today. That's the existing rule. When and if you start having more multi-unit development that's not in a municipality served by municipal water and wastewater, the designers are just going to have to manage these requirements and design the system for the purpose of the development that they're designing. Will it lead to larger lot sizes? I can't say right now. It may, because the system may be larger, but it might be innovative enough to fit on the lot where it's going to be located with the quote unquote replacement area as well. So it's hard to say that this is going to somehow limit or frustrate your intent under S100 in providing for multi-unit housing on smaller parcels. It may not, but it's just the existing law.
So can you speak to sort of a first in and does your backup system have to be located entirely on your parcel, but the isolation area doesn't?
For a new system, yes, the replacement area has to be on your parcel. For existing systems that were in existence prior to 2003 or 2004, you can get variances or exceptions because you weren't, when you built your system, you weren't subject to these requirements. But yeah, it can, the replacement area is on yours, but the zone, I mean, it's health-based. It's designed to keep things that could contaminate your water away from its source, or to keep your wastewater system away from contamination of other water sources.
We might have to go do a bird rescue. I know.
Hitchcock.
Not a happy end.
When the notification of overshadowing issue came up, because people were doing things called spite wells.
Spite wells.
Spite wells. They were going, and they didn't want their neighbor to develop a certain part of the neighbor's property, or they wanted to maintain a view shed and not have development there. They'd sink a well in a corner of their property and prevent development around that. And without even notifying the neighbor. And so there was a discussion at the time about whether the state should go to, boundary-based isolation distances, set specific feet that didn't extend onto, and it was determined that that's not how Vermont has been doing it. It's always been a health-based standard. It's always been protective of the system. And the resolution was to provide the adjacent property owner notice, but not to change the health-based isolation distance standard.
Representative
Just out
Bogart.
of curiosity, first, I know that there's no single answer to this, so I asked the question knowing that. But for a typical single-family home, how big is your isolation? So, or how might it be, or what's?
There's the diagram.
Oh, I didn't go to that.
Brian's probably the better one to answer this,
No typical.
but should I use this? So this is table 11.2 in the DEC rules, potable water supply and wastewater for proposed existing or permanent leach fields and proposed or permanent replacement areas with less than 2,000 gallons per day design flow. You have to do a calculation of it's basically 100 to 200 feet for an area with a gallon per minute design rate of less than 2. It's 150 to 300 for if it's over 2 and less than 5, etc.
Okay.
That kind of calculation. And it can go up to, it can be pretty significant, 1,000 feet or more.
Any further questions on this topic? Anything you want to add, Brennan?
No, it's an issue that we hear a lot about in our permitting processes from the notification that is occurring.
Yeah.
But everything that Mike just testified to is accurate.
You, Alfred?
I apologize. It's my iPad. It's not.
Hard to tell who's in charge sometimes with our iPads.
Yeah.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
I guess the next question was, are towns limited to designated areas for locating wastewater? And I assumed you meant municipal wastewater.
Yeah.
Either direct or indirect discharge. And historically, they haven't been. So I went through the wastewater permits and, I looked at some of the municipal systems that I know are treatment plants. And like, for example, Troy J, that's a wastewater treatment plant. And then I looked at the list of designated areas, and there isn't a designated area in Troy or Jay. So historically, they haven't been. But if you look at it's S100 memo from Neil Common and Kamen and Eric Lott to Secretary Moore. They discuss, well, actually, let's step back. I don't really think there's a prohibition in statute on locating or permitting. The restriction is in the state revolving loan funds and the money that municipalities need to build a treatment plant or a community indirect discharge system, soil-based system. That's where you get the restriction. It's not in the actual permitting requirements. I mean, frankly, the direct discharge permit requirements from 1974, I don't even think there were designated areas in 1974. So the requirement comes from the state revolving loan funds. And you'll see in this memo that and there's a rule that the agency uses for the award of funds underneath the revolving loan funds. And they first discuss how ARPA has this requirement that for any of the ARPA funds for wastewater, it has to be in designated areas. But for the traditional state revolving loan funds, there's this rule that says basically, I'll just read it. I'll just summarize. Basically, you need to have a designated area that's being served by the system. You can have the system outside the designated area to serve your designated area, but you have to maintain compliance with, I think it's 210C, which says that you be eligible for a grant from the agency for the final design or construction of a new wastewater treatment facility, including replacement facilities. The applicant must demonstrate that the project is designed to serve a designated center only unless there are significant health and environmental problems located outside of a designated center. If a sewer line serving a designated center must be located partially outside of a designated center in order to abate an existing pollution problem, connect a treatment plant with the designated center, to connect one or more designated centers, the municipality must demonstrate that the impacts of growth resulting from the infrastructure can be adequately managed and will not contribute to scattered development. It's a sprawl prevention criteria.
And that's a state.
Pardon?
Is that a state rule?
It's an agency of natural resources rule. It only applies to the direct discharge wastewater system. There's an exception for the indirect soil-based systems, but there are criteria for the soil-based systems as well. Maybe Brian can talk to you more about the soil-based systems. Thought I was all prepared for this. If the applicant proposes to run all or a portion of a sewer line outside of a designated center, and the applicant must demonstrate that there are no reasonable project alternatives to locating the sewer line outside a municipally designated center, and then the municipality has prepared a strategy designed to ensure that the project will not contribute to scattered development.
Even in this, it can be located outside of the center. It just has to be serving of the center, the designated.
Yes. And then the question is, if between the system and the designated center along that line, can there be connections along that line? And the municipality needs to have it needs to have basically strategies to prevent connections along that line to prevent scattered development. So I think the overall question, must a treatment plant or treatment system be located in a designated center? No, but if you want money, it has to be, it doesn't necessarily have to serve only the designated center, but the municipality needs to have strategies or provisions in place to prevent scattered development from the location of that system outside of the designated center. Look at those two and see if that's.
Any questions?
That's all I have.
Any further questions on Michael? We did get some, there's a section of S100 that speaks to water and line service areas, and we've gotten some, it's a bit confusing. I'm wondering if it's in Ellen's area of jurisdiction, but it is related to water and sewer service areas. And
can you point me to it?
yeah, that's section 2. Early on.
Draft at this point.
Draft 2.1. Where's that section?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
We're talking about, we have this, you're talking about this section?
Yes, I am.
Which
Page
is
5.
6, 506, 506.
I shared this struggle. I had to read it a lot to understand it. It's kind of almost like a negative. It's supposed to be identifying areas that can be excluded from the definition of areas served by water and sewer. I think there may be an easier way to word it. I'm not necessarily asking.
Is it the flood hazard language or the lines 19 and 20?
Kind of all of it. It's like, it's sort of the small 2, because it's sort of, so it starts out saying, as used in the section, in areas served by water and sewer means, but then, and that's in small I, and then an areas established by ordinance, the bylaw that exclude those areas. So it's sort of it's allowing towns a little bit of flexibility in defining how they in defining water and sewer surface areas, and it's almost like a double negative.
So as used in this section, an area served by municipal sewer and water means areas established by the municipality by ordinance or bylaw
That
exclude areas served by sewer and water to address an identified community scale. Is it supposed to be an area served or not be an area served?
Right. So it is served by water and sewer, but it's enabling the town to
address a community scale public health hazard. I don't know what your intent is.
Which number are you looking at?
3.
Oh, at the bottom, yeah.
Because I don't see anything that says shall not mean. So this would,
Right.
it would mean it is served, it is.
I know. Okay, thank you.
Oh.
I was struggling with that. Representative Segura.
Are we trying to figure out what 3 is?
3, what it is, and also whether it's in or out.
So Is it the Billington water system?
Oh, yeah, it is. Yep, thank you. I think that's that one. Exclude areas served by stormwater. So it was where they had to extend the water line, for example.
Right, for,
Is that right?
right, and so you, from what I know of this bill, and I don't know a lot, those areas served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure are subject to additional requirements and
Density requirements.
do you want these areas to be subject to those additional requirements? Or?
It would allow the town to decide.
Okay.
Right. So it would give the municipality flexibility. Your town has come up a lot in this conversation in the natural resource areas, perhaps where they don't want to see density, even though they have old water and sewer lines that weren't, sort of before they were thinking about density in certain areas.
I don't know if I need to read this a lot.
Yes, I'm not asking you to respond right now at all, but I think that you could help us clarify this.
Okay.
If you are able, if you have the time. Any further questions for Michael? Great, thank you for joining us. So, great numbers. We're bumping up against our time frame here. Representative Logan.
Yeah, I hope I can keep this really brief. Just one final request for the day to ask the committee if we should instruct Ellen to include this proposed text to modify S-100 to include a preferred municipal delegation route in S-100. Got the language. I couldn't find it on the committee website, actually. I believe it is on there.
It's Moreau's name.
Well, Moreau's, but if you look at the testimony from Moreau, it's his written testimony.
Separate days.
Oh, 2 separate days. Oh, got it.
But it should be
Gotcha.
under his name. If you look, did you look on the date or the name?
I looked on the date.
Yeah, if you look at his name.
Oh, okay. So with a couple suggestions, I have a couple suggestions here. I suggest that we add the proposed text for option 1. Obviously, this was in reference to a draft where we had the sections on enhanced designation, which are now cut out of our draft. Oh, you have a friend?
It's a natural history moment.
Nice. So I would suggest, if we look at page 28, that the preferred municipal delegation route be included as a new section 16A under Act 250 exemption requirements. And then the current 16A be moved to 16B. And that would include this exemption within the sunset of Act 250 exemptions. So this preferred municipal delegation route would be, would sunset June 30th, 2026 for all projects that are to be completed by June 30th, 2029. And then at the same time, we would have the report, the NRB report, that would be looking at location-based jurisdiction options for the longer term. So this would be specifically municipal delegation route, specifically for the purposes of S-100. And then I would also add, right now, this municipal delegation has the executive director of the Natural Resources Board making the decision on delegation, and spoke with others who suggested it be the director or their designee. And the director has said she would make herself available to provide further testimony on this.
Directors, you
Oh, I'm sorry.
chair is Sabina.
Oh, the chair. I'm sorry. Sabina Haskell, the chair, is happy to provide testimony tomorrow morning, as would Megan Tuttle, the planner for the city of Burlington. But I did want to, so again, it would be new section 16A, moving 16A to 16B. So that includes this preferred municipal delegation route as sunsetting with other Act 250 exemptions in S100. And then the agreement would be negotiated between the director or their designee and the municipality.
Representative Sevilla.
And so you are asking for that to be included in the next draft?
In the next draft, yeah. I would send an email to Ellen.
So the clock in this bill is ticking, and that is a big ask and a heavy lift. We talked about it earlier. I getting to the place where it's like, if you want a housing bill to move this year, we got to stop adding lots of new reasons to take testimony and avenues to explore. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get the sections out that we're looking at as we've just experienced. So that's the thing I would put out there as a caution to the committee.
I'd say this is written on the back of a napkin.
It's not.
It's a joke. There is no board. There's like, it says all the authority can be taken back by whom. It's never going to happen. All of this needs to be like 15 pages long, really thinking through exactly what happens under what circumstances, what the criteria are, what we're actually, well, this is written on the back of the napkin, and we can't. I mean, I think it's a joke for this committee. This committee has, this is the committee that gave us the billboard law, gave us the bottle bill in the first instance, passed Act 250. This committee has always done really good work. This is, to say this isn't half-baked, it's not even, I know that the community wants it, but this is a huge discussion that really needs to be thought through. And, it requires the director who knows nothing about, I don't even know what the director means, but it's an employee who reports to the governor. Act 250 is supposed to be separate from direct interference from the governor. I'm not saying this governor or any governor. This is the way it's set up right now because there really is no board, and it's a direct report to the governor, basically. And it's just all, so it's all under the control of the administration, and it's just not. It's not nearly. It's not nearly thought through. This is back of the napkin. Considerably.
I'm not sure that I appreciate the characterization of the proposal. And I would say that we've heard from our largest population centers, which are the places that are experiencing the most pressure to provide housing, that this is important. So, Madam Chair, I understand we are under a tight time clock. We do not have the kind of time that is necessary, but I would support at least hearing from the planner on this. And, I don't think we can continue to say, I don't think on the one hand, we can continue to hold tight to the provisions of Act 250 and then say the entity that is in charge of overseeing it is completely defunct. Those two things cannot really, they can't continue. They can't continue here. And we can't hold on to something and say that about the entity. I mean, we've got to figure it out. So I think we have a lot of pressure on us. There are two other amendments that I'm interested in, the electricity and rural electricity, and the 4 being not included in the 25 cap. And I am committed to being here just as early and staying just as late as necessary. I'll come back after dinner. Understand this is a really heavy lift and we don't have a lot of time. And you're trying to make sure that we put out good policy. So.
Smith, Clifford, and Stebbins.
I don't think we have to work all hours of the night, but I think we need to make sure I want to make sure that this 40-something, 44 pages is going to be good for my town. And I need to know that before I can vote yes or no on this bill. So it needs to keep getting knocked into my head. If what Representative Logan wants to add is good, if what you want to keep in is good, and what Seth is considering, Representative Bongartz is considering is good, I need to know what's good for my town of Derby. That's my primary concern sitting in this committee right now. But I don't want to sit here till midnight because we've done these sessions and on the floor, and all it does is make people cranky and they can't wait to get out of there. So let's do it when our head's fresh. We have to get it done on Monday or Tuesday. So what? What's 2 or 3 days if we do it right?
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just, I hear Representative Bongard. I think that this language needs to be heard. I think it needs to, I think we owe it to those municipalities who, whether it's, was written on a napkin or however, but I mean, I think, and I'd also like to hear from the chair of the NRB, whether or not they could, do this or not. So again, along the same lines as Representative Smith, I know that the mayor of the city of Rutland also likes this language. So I would just want to hear some testimony as to whether or not that's doable, if it's possible. I would support this. That's all.
Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have not spent an entire off session working on Act 250, so I will acknowledge that. I guess I don't see this as rewriting all of Act 250. Representative Logan and I were sent a spreadsheet that shows for our community, a particular bylaw, what the Act 250 criteria is, the next ordinance, what the Act 250 criteria is, this, the Act 250 and criteria is. And for me, I could imagine adding to the back of this page, under 4 parentheses E, that you provide the crosswalk, that shows what your bylaws are, how they meet Act 250. And I guess I agree. I don't think back of the envelope is helpful. I also, there are lawyers, and maybe the board is perhaps, not meeting in a robust fashion and not with the representative expertise, but certainly there are many lawyers and experts within the entity of the Act 250 process, the NRB team, that do have the expertise to figure out whether or not this bylaw actually, whether or not all these bylaws do comply. And I guess I would support certainly hearing from the testimony and taking a look at this, but I am definitely mindful of all of the other requests and the ticking time.
Representative Logan.
Oh, thank you. one final thought in the delegation agreement section, like you just mentioned, providing a crosswalk that demonstrates to us how they're complying with Act 250 under their own zoning permitting processes. It would probably also be beneficial to add to this language that the NRB report back to us in the next session on the agreements that they have made with municipalities. And then finally, I think one thing that we should also want in an agreement between the NRB and a municipality would be some agreement to a fee that would replace the Act 250 fees that they're currently paying. So.
Well, maybe we don't debate the merits of particular details.
Right
this
now,
moment.
yeah.
We can hear from the NRB tomorrow and from the Burlington planner. I'm going to suggest we hold on having Ellen include it this moment, but we can present it to us tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Bongard?
I'll do that if you don't want to.
Okay, all right.
I would just think we'd have to take so much testimony.
With that, we're adjourned for the evening. And reconvene after the floor tomorrow.